Hello there, I'm Sandy Allnock, and I'm an artist. Today we're going to be talking about watercolor, and I'll show you how to paint the background in this painting as well as the pots. And the plants themselves are going to be elsewhere, but I'll tell you where that's going to be in a few minutes. This is related to the 30 Days to More Confident Watercolor Sketching class. The first lesson has 3 pots in it, not these 3 pots, not arranged this way. They're all done as small postcards, just meant to be quick studies to get you feeling more confident in your watercolor. Now, there's a lot of people who have taken that class several times because it's so much fun they wanted to do it over and over again. Well, this time I thought it would be kind of fun to go through this entire course and repaint them all. I'm going to repaint them larger. The size is going to be larger, which means I have more room for detail. And I'm also going to be using photographs. I'm going to find photos that are kind of related to whatever the lesson was for the class. And if you want to go along with me and do that, great. If not, just do the lessons in the course itself. What I wanted to do was make my paintings larger this time, not do them as small postcards, and find a photograph for reference that's a little more advanced, but still related to the lesson. And in the lesson, there are 3 pots. There's no photograph for it. We just draw 3 pots, and I'll show you some techniques for adding some plants to your pots. It's pretty straightforward and simple, and they're just meant to be sketches. They're not meant to be kind of nice, refined paintings. They're just sketches on postcards. But this one is much larger. It's an 1/8 sheet of watercolor paper. And I start by making the blinds on the window, which are very pale, with a super light wash of Paynes blue gray. You could also do it with any black that you have, or mix a black color with whatever your favorite mix is, but lots and lots of water, so it's really thin. And I'm using a big brush, either turning it sideways so I get the full width of it, or turning the angle of it so that I get a thinner slat in my blinds. And there's a couple places, the light is so blown out in this, there's a couple places where you can kind of see faint verticals on the blinds themselves. So I just wanted to throw a little something in there. By the time I get the rest of the painting in there, none of that back there is going to matter, and I'm going to be painting plants in front of it anyway. But since I'm painting the background really light, really pale, I can just paint right over the pots, as you can see, because the pots are going to be darker than the color that I'm using for the background. And you can't always do that with a painting. If you have a dark table that you're painting underneath of your pots, like we do in the lesson, you can't just paint right through the pots because they're lighter in most cases. But here I just started painting all of those grays in. And I'm trying to do all of the grays in the window shades while everything's wet, because if you dry it like this, I wanted to be able to show you how this works out. You end up with a double line. See where the line crosses the vertical? You end up with a darker gray. And for a background like this, you want it to be as soft as possible. So in order to get rid of that, if you end up getting the whole thing dry before you're ready to get it dry, is just use a little clean water or a baby wipe, and you can lighten that. So once you get all that dry, you can do something that I realized I should have done first, which is I wanted to make the table a little darker so that there's a bit of darkness at the bottom of the painting, and then it's going to slowly get lighter as it gets toward the top. So I'll mix a little bit thicker pigment at the very bottom, but not very dark. I don't want it to be super dark because this is in front of a really bright window, and I want to keep that feeling. So just kind of adding a little bit more of the color to it until I'm satisfied that I've got just a little tiny bit of difference in value. And using a baby wipe to remove the paint off the tape, as well as to soften that top edge. But that meant, of course, that I lost the shadows that I had painted. So I can paint those again right over top, and I can even make the paint kind of go into the pots if I need to, because I'm going to paint over top of that. But I'm looking to simplify the shapes as much as possible. Now you'll also notice if you try this one that I took away the saucers on the pots because they just add a lot of complexity. And I wanted to make it much more streamlined so there's no saucers under the two pots on the left and right. But now I've got my shadows under there. And as you start looking at a reference photo, you might start noticing this one, since the table is shiny, it has several levels of either reflections or shadows coming off of it. And sometimes it's because of the way the light's bouncing off of a wall or that kind of thing. So you can add some subtleties in there with darker pigment right below the pots themselves, but you can also get away with not doing that. But I wanted just a little darker closer to the pots and then softened it with a baby wipe and then dried everything. So now it's time to start putting in the pots. Now each one of these in the photograph has a little bit of bounced light on the left and right side. So I've mixed some Paynes blue-gray with a little bit of transparent red oxide, or you could use a burnt sienna, so that I could make a warmer kind of gray color for the pot. It's a little metal canister thing. And I'm painting the color in the center first, and then I switch to a smaller brush, a number 2, and I'm just going to use clean water. And I'm going to paint clean water out to the edge and try to keep that paint from like crawling all the way out to the edge so it stays lighter out there, but just letting the watercolor move into the water so that I get that real soft edge with a glow around it coming from behind, because these are lit from the back. In the lesson, we're not doing backlighting. We're doing something much simpler from the side. But here, as a more advanced student, you might be able to handle having the darkness in the center because the light is curling around both sides from the back side of the pot. And I'll do the same thing with the others. This one is just transparent red oxide. Paint some water in the outside edges. Let that color carry on. And with the smaller brush, I can definitely let that pigment come out and get a nice sharp edge where I want to go, because my big fat quill brush that I was using is just a big fat quill brush. It can get some detail in there, but it's just much easier to do this with a smaller, finer brush to get the detail. All the supplies that I'm using, by the way, are going to be listed in the doobly-doo as well as over at Art Venture. And Art Venture is free to join, so if you have thought about joining and you were like, I don't know if I can handle that, if I need another social media, if I need just come join us. You don't have to come back if you don't like it, but I think it's going to be a really fun month in April of seeing everybody's approach to the same paintings. Most people are going to just follow the video lessons in the class itself. They're not going to be worrying about doing anything this advanced, but it might be interesting to even watch it just so you know kind of an alternate technique to what you learn in the class. Or you might decide after you get through the class to go through and try some of the more advanced ones later. And you can always go back and visit any class all over again and start from the very beginning each time. I know a ton of people who will do that on an ongoing basis. They just go and revisit an old class if they can't afford a new one. And if we've got inflation coming up, you might not have money to go get a new class. So you're welcome to try doing an old one again and put a twist on it like I'm doing here. Just challenge yourself to do something a little different. So for this pot, it has 2 colors to it. There's color on the top section and the bottom section. So I dried the top entirely so that that green doesn't travel up into the brown edge of the pot itself. And of course, on anything like this, you can change the colors from what they are in any photo anyway. This pot on the left, the color was thin enough that I could still see those blinds coming through it. So I decided to add a darker stripe around the pot. You could add patterns, all sorts of fun things to it. And that just covers up the fact that there's a little haze of that gray blinds coming through behind it. For the center pot, this is a little metal bucket, and I mixed a very, very thin bit of this same kind of color, Paynes blue-gray color, and I'm just going to use the tiny brush to make some stripes around it that I can see in the photograph. And that very soft gray color is just going to kind of dry into the painting itself, and it's going to be very soft and just barely there, but it's going to add enough detail to be interesting. You can also line those up if you have some places where the color from the blinds shows through. But hopefully you've made the color from the blinds soft enough that you won't see it very much. You might see it in one of your pots if it's really, really pale, like mine on the left. But you can always use designs on the front of them or darken the color so that they cover what's behind them. So for each one of these, I'm adding a little bit of the thicker, darker pigment just to the bottom so they anchor very nicely to the table. And then the bucket has a handle on it. And rather than getting too much into the detail on the handle, I'm simplifying that by just making a bit of color in here with some white spaces in between, because there's some highlights in there. And I didn't feel like worrying about the shading and the shadows and where all that goes. I just wanted something simple because the focus in this is the plants. And in order to simplify things, always keep in mind, what is the main thing? What is the thing that is the reason that you chose that particular reference to paint or decided to paint that subject? And make sure that nothing you do takes away from that. And that little handle on the pot was not important enough. It was just enough that I wanted it there, but I didn't want it to take over and to be too important. If you would like to paint this and you need to see the second part of the video, then you're going to need to join the 30 Days to More Confident Watercolor Sketching class. And on April 1st, I'll be adding this video as well as the second half of it to the bonus section at the bottom of Lesson 1, since this is related to the 3 pots we'll be painting in the postcard version for Lesson 1. And I'm going to be talking about this whole process more during Open Studio on Friday. That's a free Zoom call, and you can join in if you would like. It's free to join ArtVenture, free to join the Zoom, free to ask questions. If you would like to submit a piece that you would like to have critiqued, I'd be happy to look at something for you. All the details are on the events page at ArtVenture on the Mighty Networks app. Links in the doobly-doo, as well as a link to the 30 Days to More Confident Watercolor Sketching class. And you can see all the supplies that you need, just basically your watercolors and a stack of postcards. Watercolor postcards is what we're painting on in the class itself, unless you're going to do my crazy advanced version, and then you'll need some more watercolor paper. So I hope to see you in ArtVenture on Friday night for that Zoom call, and bring your questions. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.